The sound of a single gunshot echoed across the vast Wyoming prairie, sending a flock of startled birds into the crimson sunset sky. Naomi Ellis gripped the sides of the wagon as another contraction tore through her, her knuckles whitening with each passing wave of pain. She was alone, miles from Hill City, with only the approaching dusk and the distant howl of coyotes to witness her struggle. Her husband had been dead for 3 months, and now, as her water broke beneath the gathering stars, she wondered if she would soon join him. "Breathe," she whispered to herself, her voice raspy from hours of travel. At 22, she hadn't imagined facing childbirth alone on the open plains. The wagon wheel had cracked 5 miles back, leaving her stranded in the unforgiving wilderness. Another contraction came, stronger than the last, forcing a muffled cry from her lips. The sound of approaching hoofbeats made her blood run cold. Raiders, outlaws. In her vulnerable state, she was defenseless. Naomi reached for the rifle beside her, knowing full well she lacked the strength to aim it properly. "Hello there. Anyone hurt?" A deep voice called out. A tall figure on horseback emerged from the gathering darkness, silhouetted against the purpling sky. As he drew closer, Naomi could make out a worn Stetson and the glint of a sheriff's badge catching the last rays of sunlight. "Stay back," she warned, her voice shaking as she pointed the rifle in his general direction. The rider slowed, raising his hands in a gesture of peace. "Madam, I mean no harm. Name's Xavier Fitzgerald, deputy from Hill City." Heard a sound that might have been a gunshot. Another contraction hit Naomi with such force that the rifle slipped from her grasp. She couldn't suppress the pained groan that escaped her lips. "Madam." Xavier's voice changed instantly, concern replacing caution. "Are you injured, the baby?" she managed between clenched teeth. "It's coming." Xavier dismounted in one fluid motion, approaching the wagon slowly. In the fading light, Naomi could see he was younger than she'd expected, perhaps in his late 20s, with kind eyes that crinkled at the corners despite his evident worry. "I need to get you to town," he said, taking in the broken wheel with a frown. Naomi shook her head. "No time. The pains are too close together." Xavier removed his hat, running a hand through dark hair as he assessed the situation. "I've helped deliver foals and calves, but never a baby." "Well, deputy," Naomi said with a grimace, "seems tonight you'll add that to your list of accomplishments." As night fell completely over the Wyoming territory in the summer of 1878, Xavier Fitzgerald found himself helping a stranger bring new life into the world. He gathered what supplies he could from his saddlebags and her wagon, laying out a bedroll beneath the vast canopy of stars. "My name is Naomi," she told him between contractions. "Naomi Ellis, widow to Thomas Ellis." Xavier nodded, working quickly to make her as comfortable as possible. "How long have you been on the trail alone, Mrs. Ellis?" "Miss," she corrected. "We weren't properly married." "And I've been traveling since Silver Creek, near 3 weeks now." Xavier didn't press for more information. The prejudices of society weren't his concern out here where the only judgment came from the silent stars above. Hours passed in a blur of pain and effort. Xavier remained steady, offering encouragement and support as Naomi labored beneath the brilliant night sky. The Milky Way stretched overhead, a glittering river of light bearing witness to the miracle unfolding on the prairie. "Push now," Xavier instructed, his voice firm but gentle. "I can see the head." With one final, tremendous effort, Naomi brought her daughter into the world. The baby's first cry pierced the night, strong and indignant, a declaration of life that seemed to make the very stars above them pulse with renewed brilliance. Xavier wrapped the infant in a clean shirt from his pack and placed her in Naomi's trembling arms. "You have a beautiful daughter, Miss Ellis." Tears streamed down Naomi's face as she gazed upon her child for the first time. The baby's eyes were open, reflecting the starlight above like tiny mirrors. "Look at that," Xavier said softly, sitting back on his heels. "She's already staring at the stars." Naomi smiled through her exhaustion. "What do you see up there, little one?" Xavier gazed upward at the magnificent display of celestial light, then back to the mother and child. Something stirred in his chest, a feeling he couldn't name. "She'll always know light," he said, his voice thick with emotion. "Born beneath the stars like this, she'll carry their brightness with her always." "Clara," Naomi whispered, kissing her daughter's forehead. "Her name is Clara. It means bright or clear." As dawn broke over the eastern horizon, Xavier had fashioned a temporary repair for the wagon wheel. Naomi and Clara slept peacefully while he prepared for their journey to Hill City. He decided to escort them personally, unwilling to leave the new mother and child to face the dangers of the trail alone. He didn't know what awaited them in Hill City, or what struggles Naomi had left behind. But as he watched her sleep beneath the fading stars, cradling her newborn daughter, Xavier Fitzgerald made a silent vow to ensure their safety, whatever it might cost him. The journey to Hill City took 3 days, with frequent stops to allow Naomi to rest and care for Clara. Xavier proved himself an attentive companion, hunting fresh game for meals and keeping watch through the nights. He shared little about himself beyond the necessary: that he'd been deputy in Hill City for 5 years, that he had a small cabin on the outskirts of town, that he'd come west after the war looking for something he couldn't name. On the final evening before reaching town, as they sat by the campfire with Clara sleeping peacefully in a makeshift cradle, Naomi finally shared her story. "Thomas wasn't a bad man," she began, her gaze fixed on the dancing flames. "Just weak. He worked the mines in Silver Creek, drank too much, gambled what little we had." She paused, tucking a strand of auburn hair behind her ear. "When I told him about the baby, he promised to change. For a while he did." Xavier remained silent, allowing her the space to continue at her own pace. "He died in a cave-in 3 months ago. The mining company paid his burial costs, but nothing more. They said without proper papers of marriage, I had no claim to compensation." She looked up at Xavier, her green eyes reflecting the firelight. "I had nowhere to go, no family to turn to. Someone mentioned Hill City was growing, that a woman with skills might find decent work there." "What skills do you have?" Xavier asked gently. "I can read and write better than most. I kept accounts for Thomas and some of the other miners. I can cook decent enough." She shrugged. "I'll do whatever work I can find." Xavier nodded thoughtfully. "Hill City's growing fast. The railroad's bringing new folks through every week. The school teacher left for Denver last month. Her mother took ill. Town's been looking for someone educated to take her place." Hope flickered briefly in Naomi's eyes before doubt clouded them again. They wouldn't hire an unmarried woman with a baby. Mayor Parker's wife runs the school committee. She's a practical woman. If you can teach, she'll care more about that than your situation. Naomi's expression softened. "You're a kind man, Deputy Fitzgerald." "Xavier," he corrected with a small smile. "Out here, we're just Xavier and Naomi." The moment lingered between them, filled with something unspoken yet palpable, before Clara's soft whimper broke the silence. Naomi moved to tend to her daughter, and Xavier added another log to the fire, his thoughts turning to what awaited them in Hill City. They reached the outskirts of town by midday. Hill City was larger than Naomi had expected, several streets of wooden buildings spreading outward from the central thoroughfare, with new construction evident on the edges. The railroad station bustled with activity, and the sound of hammers and saws filled the air. Xavier guided the wagon toward a modest two-story building with a sign reading Holloway Boarding House. "Mrs. Holloway is fair and discreet," he explained as he helped Naomi down from the wagon. "She'll give you a decent room at a reasonable price until you get settled." Mrs. Holloway proved to be a round-faced woman in her 50s with shrewd eyes that missed nothing. She took in Naomi's exhausted appearance, the newborn in her arms, and the protective stance of the deputy beside them. "Well, Deputy Fitzgerald, seems you've brought me some interesting guests," she remarked, ushering them inside to a small but clean parlor. "Miss Ellis needs a room for herself and her daughter," Xavier said. "She's come to Hill City looking for work." Mrs. Holloway studied Naomi for a long moment before nodding. "I've got a room on the second floor, back corner. Gets good morning light. $2 a week, includes breakfast and supper." Relief washed over Naomi's face. "Thank you, Mrs. Holloway. I can pay for the first 2 weeks now." She reached for the small purse tucked in her bodice. "Let's get you settled first," the older woman said, her tone softening as she glanced at Clara. "That little one's brand new, isn't she? Born on the trail." "Yes, madam, 3 nights ago." Mrs. Holloway's eyebrows rose as she looked at Xavier. "And you were present for this blessed event, Deputy?" Xavier shifted uncomfortably. "I happened upon Miss Ellis when her wagon broke down. The circumstances required assistance." A knowing look passed over the landlady's face. "Indeed. Well, come along then. You look dead on your feet, Miss Ellis." "Deputy, you can bring up her trunk." As Mrs. Holloway led Naomi upstairs, Xavier returned to the wagon to retrieve her belongings. The small trunk contained everything Naomi Ellis owned in the world, and its lightness struck him as profoundly sad. A woman and child starting life with so little in a town where they knew no one except him. The thought settled in his mind with unexpected weight. They knew him. After ensuring Naomi and Clara were properly settled, Xavier took his leave, promising to return the next day to introduce Naomi to Mayor Parker's wife regarding the teaching position. As he walked to his office, his thoughts remained with the woman and child who had so unexpectedly entered his life. Something about Naomi Ellis stirred feelings he'd long thought dormant, a desire to protect, to provide, to be something more than the solitary figure he'd become since arriving in Wyoming. Sheriff Donovan looked up from his desk as Xavier entered the office. "Where have you been, Fitzgerald?" "Thought you were just riding patrol to the North Ridge." "Got delayed," Xavier replied, hanging his hat on the rack. "Found a woman stranded with a broken wagon wheel. She went into labor right there on the plains." The sheriff's bushy eyebrows shot up. "You delivered a baby." "Didn't have much choice. Brought her and the child to town today. She's staying at Holloway's looking for work." Donovan leaned back in his chair, regarding his deputy with newfound interest. "Married woman." "Widow," Xavier said, the half-truth coming easily to protect Naomi's reputation. "Name's Naomi Ellis. She's educated, might be suitable for the teaching position." Donovan stroked his gray-streaked beard. "Margaret Parker was complaining just yesterday about finding a replacement teacher before the fall term." He studied Xavier's face for a moment. "You seem mighty invested in this widow woman's welfare, Deputy." Xavier busied himself with the coffee pot in the corner. "Just doing my job, helping a citizen in need." "Uh-huh," Donovan replied skeptically. "Well, do your job now and ride out to check on that report of cattle rustling near the Peterson place. I need to know if it's worth pursuing or just Peterson being paranoid again." Grateful for the change of subject, Xavier nodded and headed back out, though his thoughts remained with the small room at Holloway's where Naomi Ellis was beginning her new life in Hill City. Over the next 2 weeks, Xavier found himself spending every free moment helping Naomi establish herself in town. He introduced her to Margaret Parker, who was indeed desperate enough for a teacher that she overlooked Naomi's status as an unwed mother after a brief demonstration of her reading and arithmetic skills. The position would start in September, giving Naomi time to recover from childbirth and settle in. In the meantime, Mrs. Holloway proved an unexpected ally, spreading word that the new boarder was skilled with a needle. And soon Naomi had a small but steady stream of mending and alteration work to supplement her meager savings until the teaching position began. Clara thrived, growing stronger each day, her eyes blue like her mother's, already seeming to track the world around her with unusual interest. Xavier found himself stopping by the boarding house each evening, ostensibly to check on their welfare, but increasingly because he craved their company. "You're spoiling us with your attention, Deputy," Naomi said one evening as they sat on the boarding house porch. Clara slept in a basket beside Naomi's rocking chair, her tiny face peaceful in the golden light of sunset. "Xavier," he reminded her gently, "and it's no hardship." "People talk, you know," she said, her fingers working steadily on the shirt she was mending. "Mrs. Holloway says half the town is convinced you're Clara's father." Xavier felt heat rise in his face. "I'm sorry. I never meant to compromise your reputation." Naomi's laugh was soft and without bitterness. "My reputation was compromised long before I met you, Xavier. I'm just warning you that associating with me might affect how people view you." "I don't much care what people think," he replied, realizing as he spoke that it was true. "Besides, you've already won over the most important people in town, Mrs. Parker, Mrs. Holloway. The rest will come around." "And if they don't," Xavier shrugged, "Hill City isn't the only town in Wyoming." Something shifted in Naomi's expression at his words, a softening, a hint of something that might have been hope. "You sound like a man who's considered moving on." "I've considered many things since meeting you and Clara," he admitted, the words coming before he could reconsider them. Their eyes met in the fading light, and for a moment Xavier thought he might lean forward, might bridge the small distance between them. Then Clara stirred in her basket, and the moment passed, though something had changed between them, something neither was ready to name. As summer progressed toward autumn, Naomi found her place in Hill City's community. Though some whispers followed her, the general reception was warmer than she dared hope. The practical frontier spirit that valued capability over convention worked in her favor, and her obvious devotion to Clara won her the support of many of the town's women. Xavier remained a constant presence, though he was careful to maintain propriety in public. He built a cradle for Clara from pine boards in his spare time, carved a set of wooden blocks as she grew more alert, and often brought small gifts for Naomi, wildflowers gathered on patrol, a ribbon from the mercantile, books borrowed from the sheriff's personal collection. "You're courting her, whether you admit it or not," Sheriff Donovan remarked one afternoon as they rode back from investigating a dispute between neighboring ranchers. Xavier didn't immediately deny it. "She deserves better than what life's given her so far. And you think you're better." There was no judgment in Donovan's tone, only curiosity. "I think I could be, for her and the child." Xavier adjusted his hat against the late August sun. "I've never felt this way before, like I finally have a purpose beyond just doing a job." Donovan nodded thoughtfully. "Known you 5 years, Fitzgerald. Never seen you look at a woman the way you look at the Ellis girl, but have you considered she might not want another man making decisions about her life? Seems to me she's doing fine standing on her own 2 feet." The words struck Xavier with uncomfortable force. He'd been so focused on helping Naomi, on protecting her, that he hadn't stopped to consider she might value her independence after her experience with Clara's father. "You're right," he admitted. "I should ask what she wants, not assume I know what's best." The opportunity came sooner than he expected. That evening, he found Naomi alone on the boarding house porch, Clara having been put to bed upstairs. The first cool breeze of approaching autumn stirred the air as Xavier took a seat beside her. "School starts next week," Naomi said, breaking the comfortable silence. "Mrs. Parker showed me the classroom today. It's small but well-maintained." "The children will be lucky to have you," Xavier replied. "You'll be a fine teacher." Naomi's fingers worried at a loose thread on her shawl. "I'm nervous. Not about teaching, but about managing everything, being a mother working full-time. Mrs. Holloway has agreed to watch Clara during school hours, but still." "You'll manage beautifully," Xavier assured her. "And you're not alone. I'm here to help however I can." She turned to face him fully, her expression serious in the deepening twilight. "Why, Xavier? Why have you done so much for us? You delivered my child, brought us to safety, helped me find work and acceptance in this town. What do you want in return?" The directness of her question startled him, but he recognized it deserved equal honesty. "At first it was just duty, then it was admiration, I suppose, for your courage, your determination." He paused, searching for the right words. "Now it's because I care for you, Naomi. For you and for Clara, more than I thought possible." Naomi's breath caught audibly. "I can't offer you what a respectable man should of a wife without a past, without another man's child." "I don't want a respectable woman," Xavier said, his voice low but firm. "I want you, exactly as you are. You and Clara. But I don't want to presume. Sheriff Donovan pointed out that I've been making decisions, trying to arrange things without asking what you truly want." "And what if what I want isn't possible?" Naomi whispered, vulnerability evident in her voice. "Tell me anyway," Xavier urged gently. She was silent for a long moment, the only sound the distant piano from the saloon down the street and the rhythmic creak of her rocking chair. "I want safety," she finally said. "For Clara, for myself. I want work that has meaning, that uses my mind. I want—" She hesitated, then continued more softly. "I want to be loved, not possessed. Thomas loved me in his way, but he saw me as something that belonged to him, like his pocket watch or his boots." Xavier reached across the space between them, his hand covering hers where it rested on the arm of the rocker. "I can promise you safety, as much as any man can in this world. I can promise to respect your work, your mind. And I can promise to love you as a person deserving of freedom and choice, not as a possession." Tears glistened in Naomi's eyes, catching the last light of day. "Those are beautiful promises, Xavier, but they're still just words." "Then let me prove them with time," he replied. "No rush, no pressure. Just two people walking forward together, seeing where the path leads." A smile slowly spread across her face, transforming it with a hope that made Xavier's heart swell. "I think I'd like that very much." He leaned forward then, slowly enough that she could have pulled away, and pressed his lips gently to hers. The kiss was brief, chaste even, but it sealed something between them, a promise, a beginning. As Xavier walked back to his cabin that night, he felt lighter than he had in years, as if some burden he hadn't even recognized had been lifted from his shoulders. For the first time since coming west, he was no longer searching. He had found his purpose, his home, in the eyes of a woman who had delivered her child beneath the stars, and in the tiny hands of the baby who would always know light. The school term began in early September, and Naomi took to teaching with natural skill. The 12 students, ranging from 6 to 15 years, quickly came to adore their new teacher, who brought energy and creativity to lessons that had previously been delivered by rote. Even the most reluctant scholars found themselves engaged by Miss Ellis's methods, which included nature walks, dramatic readings, and practical applications of arithmetic. Meanwhile, Clara grew stronger each day under Mrs. Holloway's watchful eye during school hours and her mother's devoted care in the evenings. At 4 months old, she was a cheerful baby with a ready smile and an apparent fascination with the world around her. Xavier and Naomi's relationship evolved cautiously but steadily. He escorted her to church on Sundays, joined her for supper at the boarding house several evenings a week, and occasionally took her for drives in a borrowed buggy on Saturday afternoons. Clara nestled between them. They were careful to maintain propriety in public, mindful of Naomi's position as the town's teacher, but their growing attachment was evident to anyone who cared to look. As autumn painted the surrounding hills with gold and crimson, Xavier began construction on a small addition to his cabin outside of town. He worked on it during his off hours, enlisting help from friends when needed, but told no one its purpose, not even Naomi. On a crisp October evening, with the scent of wood smoke hanging in the air, Xavier invited Naomi and Clara to supper at his cabin for the first time. He'd spent the entire day preparing cleaning, cooking a rabbit stew from his mother's recipe, setting his small table with the good dishes he'd barely used since purchasing them years ago. Naomi arrived wrapped in a blue shawl he'd given her the previous week, Clara bundled against her chest in a sling. Her cheeks were pink from the cool air, her eyes bright with curiosity as she took in his home. "It's lovely," she said, looking around the simple but well-maintained cabin. A stone fireplace dominated one wall, bookshelves lined another, and the furniture, though sparse, was sturdy and well-crafted. "It's small," Xavier replied, taking her shawl, "but it's home." "Size doesn't make a home," Naomi said softly, bouncing Clara gently as the baby began to fuss. "Love does." The words hung between them, laden with meaning neither was quite ready to articulate fully. Xavier busied himself with serving the stew while Naomi settled Clara on a blanket near the fire, giving her a wooden rattle to play with. They ate by lamplight, talking easily about the town, her students, his work. When the meal was finished, Xavier cleared his throat nervously. "There's something I'd like to show you," he said, rising from the table, "if you'll bundle Clara up again." Curiosity evident in her expression, Naomi wrapped Clara snugly against the evening chill. Xavier took a lantern and led them outside, around the side of the cabin where a new structure stood adjacent to the main building. "What is this?" Naomi asked as Xavier opened the door, holding the lantern high. The room was small but carefully crafted, with a window facing east and built-in shelves along one wall. A rocking chair sat in one corner beside a small table. "It's a nursery," Xavier said quietly. "Or it will be when it's finished, for Clara." Naomi turned to him, eyes wide with surprise. "A nursery, I thought." He hesitated, suddenly unsure. "That is, I hoped, when you're ready, if you're willing, that you and Clara might consider making a home here, with me." Understanding dawned in her eyes. "Xavier, are you asking?" "I'm asking if you'll marry me, Naomi Ellis," he said, the words rushing out now that they'd begun. "Not tomorrow or next week. Whenever you're ready. I love you, both of you. I want to be a father to Clara, a husband to you." Tears filled Naomi's eyes, reflecting the lantern light. "You've thought of everything, haven't you?" "I've tried," he admitted. "I want you to keep teaching. We're close enough to town. I know you value your independence, and I would never want to take that from you. But I thought we might build something together, something stronger than either of us could create alone." Clara cooed softly in her mother's arms, as if adding her approval to the plan. Naomi looked from her daughter to the man standing before her, his face open and vulnerable in a way few ever saw. "Yes," she whispered, then more firmly, "Yes, Xavier, I'll marry you." Joy unlike anything he'd ever known flooded through him. Xavier set the lantern carefully on the table before gathering Naomi and Clara gently in his arms, mindful of the baby between them. "I promise you'll never regret it," he murmured against her hair. "I know," she replied, lifting her face for his kiss. "I've known since that night beneath the stars." They were married on Christmas Eve in the small white church on Hill City's Main Street. The building was decked with pine boughs and red ribbons, candlelight warming the simple space. Despite the holiday and the snow that had fallen steadily all day, the church was full a testament to how quickly Naomi had become a beloved part of the community. Clara, now 7 months old and recently mastering the art of sitting up independently, was dressed in a white gown that Naomi had painstakingly sewn from her own wedding dress, altered to fit a baby. Mrs. Holloway held her during the ceremony, the child's wide eyes taking in the candles and decorations with evident delight. Sheriff Donovan stood as Xavier's best man, his gruff exterior softened for the occasion. Mrs. Parker had helped Naomi prepare for the day, lending her a pearl comb for her upswept hair and serving as matron of honor. As Naomi walked down the aisle in a simple blue dress that matched her eyes, Xavier felt as though his heart might burst from his chest. That this remarkable woman had chosen him, had agreed to build a life with him, still seemed like a miracle. The ceremony was brief but meaningful, their vows spoken clearly before God and the community that had embraced them. When the minister pronounced them husband and wife, Xavier kissed his bride with reverent joy, the applause of their friends and neighbors washing over them like a blessing. The celebration continued at the town hall, where tables groaned with potluck contributions from half the households in Hill City. There was music and dancing, laughter and a few happy tears. Clara was passed from admiring arms to admiring arms, clearly enjoying being the center of attention almost as much as her mother and new father. As the evening wore on, snow continued to fall outside, transforming the world into a white wonderland. Xavier and Naomi slipped away shortly before midnight, collecting Clara from Mrs. Holloway and making their way to the cabin that would now be their family home. Xavier had spent the previous week moving Naomi's few possessions from the boarding house, setting up Clara's nursery, and preparing for their arrival. As he carried his drowsy daughter across the threshold, Naomi beside him with a lamp to light their way, he felt a sense of rightness that defied description. "Welcome home," he said softly, looking from Clara to Naomi. "Home," Naomi repeated, her smile illuminating the room better than any lamp could have done. They settled Clara in her new crib, the child too tired from the excitement of the day to protest the unfamiliar surroundings. Together they stood watching her drift into peaceful sleep, the tiny rise and fall of her chest beneath the quilt Mrs. Holloway had gifted them. "She's growing so fast," Xavier murmured, his arm around Naomi's waist. "Seems like yesterday she was just born." "That night feels both like yesterday and a lifetime ago," Naomi agreed, leaning her head against his shoulder. "I was so afraid, so alone. Then you appeared like an answer to a prayer I hadn't even known to make." Xavier pressed a kiss to her temple. "I think it was me who found what I needed that night. I'd been drifting for years, doing my job well enough but without real purpose. You and Clara gave me a reason to build something lasting." Naomi turned in his arms, her hands coming to rest on his chest. "I love you, Xavier Fitzgerald." "And I love you, Naomi Fitzgerald," he replied, the new name filling him with pride and tenderness in equal measure. As snow continued to fall outside, blanketing the world in peaceful white, Xavier and Naomi retired to their room, beginning their married life in the quiet joy of found family and promised tomorrows. The first year of their marriage brought adjustments and challenges, as any new union does, but Xavier and Naomi faced them together with determination and growing love. Clara thrived in their small family, taking her first steps across the cabin floor in early spring and rapidly developing a vocabulary that amused and sometimes startled the adults around her. Naomi continued teaching, riding to town each morning with Clara and returning in the afternoons. The arrangement worked well, with Xavier taking care of their daughter when his deputy schedule allowed. On days when their work overlapped, Mrs. Holloway was happy to mind the growing toddler, having become something of an honorary grandmother to the child. In the summer, Xavier added another room to their cabin, expanding their home as their needs and means grew. He'd been promoted to senior deputy with a corresponding increase in pay, and Naomi's position as teacher had become permanent with the town council's unanimous approval. On the first anniversary of the night Clara was born, they took her out beneath the stars, spreading a blanket on the hill behind their cabin. The child, now a year old, reached toward the heavens with delighted squeals, as if recognizing the canopy that had witnessed her entry into the world. "She does always know light," Xavier remarked, watching his daughter's fascination with the night sky. "Just like I said that night." Naomi leaned against him, her hand finding his in the darkness. "You've given us both so much light, Xavier. A home, security, love." "You've given me the same," he replied, squeezing her fingers gently. "More than I ever thought I have." As autumn approached again, Naomi discovered she was expecting their second child. The news filled their home with renewed joy and anticipation. Clara, though too young to fully understand, seemed to sense the excitement, patting her mother's still flat stomach with gentle hands. "Baby," she would say, one of her growing collection of words. "Baby come." "Yes, little Starlight," Xavier would answer, using the nickname he'd given her. "A baby brother or sister is coming." The pregnancy progressed smoothly through the winter months. Naomi continued teaching until spring, when Mrs. Parker insisted she rest for the final weeks before the birth. Unlike Clara's dramatic arrival beneath the open sky, their second child was born in the comfort of their cabin with the assistance of the town doctor and Mrs. Holloway, on a mild April morning in 1880. "A boy," the doctor announced, placing the red-faced, squalling infant in Naomi's arms after cleaning and wrapping him. "Strong lungs on this one." Xavier, who had paced anxiously outside during the birth, was called in to meet his son. The emotion that swept through him as he looked upon the child, his child by blood, though Clara was no less his in his heart, nearly brought him to his knees. "He's perfect," he whispered, sitting carefully beside Naomi on the bed. Clara, who had been staying with Mrs. Holloway during the birth, would be brought home later to meet her brother. "What shall we name him?" Naomi asked, her face tired but radiant with joy. Xavier considered for a moment. "Thomas," he suggested gently, "for the man who brought you west, who is part of how we came to find each other." "If that feels right to you." Tears welled in Naomi's eyes at the unexpected generosity of the gesture. "Thomas Xavier Fitzgerald," she nodded. "A good, strong name." When Clara was brought home that afternoon, her reaction to her new brother was one of solemn curiosity. At nearly 2 years old, she approached the bundle in her mother's arms with caution, her blue eyes wide. "Baby came," she stated matter-of-factly, reaching out a tentative finger to touch the infant's cheek. "Yes, Starlight," Xavier said, lifting her onto his lap so she could see better. "This is your brother, Thomas." "Thomas," Clara repeated carefully, then with the pure logic of childhood added, "My Thomas." "Yes," Naomi agreed with a smile. Your brother Thomas. The family of 4 settled into a new rhythm over the coming months. Xavier took a more active role in caring for the children, especially during the summer when school was not in session, and Naomi was recovering from childbirth. Sheriff Donovan, now in his 60s and considering retirement, adjusted the deputy's schedule to allow more time at home. "Family comes first, Fitzgerald," the older man said gruffly when Xavier protested the preferential treatment. "Town's quiet enough these days, I can manage with Lancaster helping out." Lancaster was the junior deputy, a young man eager to prove himself. By the time Thomas was 6 months old, Naomi had returned to teaching, though now with 2 children in tow. The school board had no objections. In fact, several members suggested that having the teacher's children present provided practical lessons in care and responsibility for the older students. Life settled into a pattern of work and family, challenges and joys. Xavier and Naomi's love deepened through shared experiences and mutual respect. Their cabin, once a bachelor's sparse dwelling, became a true home filled with books, children's toys, and the everyday treasures of family life. When Sheriff Donovan finally retired in the summer of 1881, the town council unanimously appointed Xavier as his replacement. The position came with increased responsibility, but also a proper house in town, larger than their cabin and closer to the school. After some discussion, Xavier and Naomi decided to accept the offer, though they kept the cabin as a retreat for weekends and summers. "It seems fitting," Naomi remarked as they moved their belongings to the sheriff's house, a comfortable 2-story home near the center of Hill City. "Our family began on the open prairie, grew in that cabin, and now expands again here in town." "Home is wherever you and the children are," Xavier replied, carrying a trunk of books into what would become their new parlor. "But I admit, having proper indoor plumbing will be a welcome change." Clara, now 3 years old and a constant chatterbox, was delighted with the new house and its proximity to her friends from school. Thomas, a robust toddler of 15 months, explored every corner with determined curiosity, keeping his parents constantly alert to potential mischief. As the years passed, Hill City continued to grow around them. The railroad brought increased commerce and new settlers. Streets were paved, a proper town hall constructed, and talks began of establishing a high school to supplement the elementary education Naomi provided. Through it all, the Fitzgeralds remained a cornerstone of the community, Xavier as sheriff, Naomi as teacher, and their children as bright examples of the future generation. Clara, true to Xavier's prediction on the night of her birth, grew into a girl with an unusual affinity for light and sky. By age 10, she could name every constellation visible from Wyoming, had read every book on astronomy the town's small library contained, and regularly corresponded with a professor at the university in Laramie who was impressed by her precocious questions. "She's going to leave us someday," Naomi said one evening as they watched their daughter through the window, her face turned skyward in the gathering dusk. "Go east to study, perhaps." "Probably," Xavier agreed, his arm around his wife's shoulders, "but she'll always come back. The stars are brightest here." Thomas grew into a sturdy, practical boy with his father's sense of justice and his mother's love of books. Where Clara dreamed of stars, Thomas was firmly rooted in earth, fascinated by the workings of the ranch outside town, the mechanics of the railroad, the practical aspects of building and growing. The family expanded again in 1885 with the birth of their daughter Alina, a surprise blessing when Naomi was 30 and Xavier 36. The older children doted on their baby sister, who seemed to combine Clara's dreamy nature with Thomas's practicality, in a combination that delighted and occasionally exhausted her parents. In 1890, as Wyoming prepared for statehood, the Fitzgeralds celebrated 15 years since the night Clara was born beneath the stars. They marked the occasion with a family trip to their cabin, now used primarily as a summer retreat. Clara, at 15, was indeed preparing for further education, having been accepted to a women's college in the East with a notable astronomy program. "I can't believe how much has happened since that night," Naomi said as they sat on the porch, watching their 3 children chase fireflies in the gathering darkness. At 35, she was still teaching, though now in the newly established high school where she served as principal as well as instructor. "Sometimes I can hardly believe it myself," Xavier replied, his hair now showing the first strands of silver at the temples. "That I was lucky enough to be riding patrol that particular night, that I heard the sound that led me to you." "Providence," Naomi said simply, her hand finding his as it had countless times over the years. Later that evening, after the younger children were asleep, Clara joined her parents outside. The sky above Wyoming was as vast and brilliant as ever, the Milky Way a shimmering river across the blackness. "You remember what you said the night I was born?" she asked Xavier, her voice thoughtful. "Mother's told me the story so many times." "I said you'd always know light," Xavier replied softly. "Born beneath the stars like that, you'd carry their brightness with you." Clara nodded, her gaze fixed on the heavens. "I think you were right. I've always felt connected to them somehow. Like they're part of me or I'm part of them." "They witnessed your beginning," Naomi said, "your first breath on this earth. And they led me to my family," Xavier added. "If not for following that sound across the prairie that night, I might never have found you and your mother." Clara smiled, leaning her head against her father's shoulder as she had done since childhood. "Then I'm grateful for the stars and for you both." As the night deepened around them, the 3 sat in companionable silence, each lost in their own thoughts, yet connected by the bonds of family and shared history. Above them, the eternal stars continued their silent vigil, just as they had on that fateful night when a child was born beneath their light and a family began its journey. Years continued to pass, bringing changes both expected and surprising. Clara did indeed go east to college, her letters home full of excitement about astronomical discoveries and the expanding opportunities for women in science. Though Xavier and Naomi missed her terribly, they took pride in her accomplishments and determination. Thomas, practical and steady, showed no interest in higher education, preferring instead to apprentice with the railroad engineer. By 20, he was operating his own repair shop in Hill City, his mechanical aptitude earning him respect throughout the county. Eleanor, the baby of the family, grew into a lively girl who combined her sister's intellectual curiosity with her brother's practical skills. She excelled in school, particularly in mathematics, and by her teenage years was helping her mother teach the younger children in Hill City. In 1898, as the new century approached, Xavier retired as sheriff after 17 years of service. At 53, he was still hale and strong, but ready to pursue other interests and spend more time with Naomi, whose own retirement from teaching was on the horizon. "What shall we do with ourselves, Sheriff?" Naomi teased as they sat on the porch of their townhouse the evening after his retirement ceremony. "I was thinking we might travel a bit," Xavier suggested. "Clara's been inviting us to visit her in Boston. Thomas can manage things here, and Eleanor's old enough now to decide if she wants to come with us or stay." "Travel," Naomi repeated thoughtfully. "I've never been further east than Cheyenne." "Then it's decided," Xavier said, taking her hand. "We'll see the country together. starting with a visit to our stargazer in Boston. The journey east was an adventure, unlike anything they'd experienced since their early days together. They traveled by train, marveling at the changing landscape as plains gave way to forests and mountains, then to the crowded cities of the eastern seaboard. Clara met them at the station in Boston, now a poised young woman of 24 with her mother's auburn hair and her father's steady gaze. She worked as a computer at the Harvard College Observatory, one of a team of women who analyzed astronomical data for male researchers. "It's frustrating sometimes," she admitted, as she showed them around the observatory. "Knowing we do the calculations that lead to discoveries, but rarely receiving credit. But things are changing slowly. And the work itself being close to the stars, understanding their patterns and mysteries, that's what matters most to me." Xavier watched his daughter with undisguised pride, as she explained the photographic plates and complex calculations with easy confidence. This remarkable woman had begun her life in the most precarious circumstances, born on the open prairie with only the stars as witnesses. Now she helped unlock those same stars' secrets. "You were right, you know," Clara said to him later, as they stood outside the observatory gazing up at the eastern night sky, dimmer than Wyoming's but still beautiful. "What you told me about always knowing light. Even during the hardest times at school or here, when I've felt discouraged or alone, I've never lost that sense of illumination, I suppose. Like there's always guidance if I look up." Xavier embraced his daughter, too moved for words. Over her shoulder, he met Naomi's gaze, saw the same emotion reflected their gratitude for the journey that had brought them all to this moment, for the family they had built together from such unlikely beginnings. After a month in Boston, they continued their travels, visiting New York, Washington, and then turning west again. They returned to Hill City in time for Christmas 1898, reuniting with Thomas, Eleanor, and the extended family and friends who had become their community over 20 years. As the new century dawned, Xavier and Naomi settled into a quieter rhythm of life. They divided their time between the townhouse and their beloved cabin, which Xavier had continued to expand and improve over the years. They welcomed grandchildren Thomas's son James in 1900, followed by his daughter Rebecca 2 years later. Clara, focused on her career, showed no interest in marriage, though she visited home whenever possible, bringing astronomical equipment for Eleanor's growing interest in the field. In 1905, 27 years after Clara's birth beneath the stars, Naomi fell ill with pneumonia during a particularly harsh winter. For weeks, Xavier rarely left her side, reading to her, caring for her with the same tenderness he had shown that night on the prairie when they first met. "Do you remember?" she asked him during her recovery, her voice still weak but her eyes bright with memory. "How frightened I was when you first appeared beside my wagon. I thought you might be a raider or an outlaw." Xavier smiled, stroking her hand where it rested on the quilt. "You threatened to shoot me, as I recall." "I did," she laughed softly, "though I doubt I could have hit anything in that condition." "I'm grateful you didn't try," he teased. "Might have changed the course of our lives considerably." Naomi's expression grew serious. "I've been thinking about that night, about how many things had to align for us to find each other. If the wagon wheel hadn't broken, if you hadn't been patrolling that section, if Clara had waited another day to make her appearance." "Providence," Xavier said, echoing the word she had used years before. "Some things are meant to be, regardless of the obstacles." As spring returned to Wyoming, bringing renewal and warmth, Naomi regained her strength. They celebrated her 55th birthday with a family gathering that included all 3 children Clara home from Boston, Thomas and his family from their house across town, and Alina, who still lived with them while teaching at the Hill City School. That summer, they took their grandchildren to the spot where Clara had been born, now marked with a small cairn of stones. Xavier told the story as they had many times before, but with new details for the wide-eyed children, how the stars had seemed to pulse with Clara's first cry, how he had known in that moment that his life had changed forever, how the baby's eyes had reflected the celestial light above. "And that's why we call your Aunt Clara Starlight," he finished, ruffling 7-year-old James's hair. "Did I have a special birth too?" the boy asked, looking between his grandparents. "Every birth is special," Naomi answered, gathering her grandson close. "Each one brings new light into the world." As twilight deepened into true night, the extended Fitzgerald family remained on the hillside, watching the stars emerge one by one. Xavier, his arm around Naomi just as it had been countless nights over their 30 years together, felt a profound sense of completion. From a single desperate night beneath the stars, to this moment surrounded by children and grandchildren, their journey had been one of courage, love, and unwavering commitment. The light that had witnessed Clara's birth had indeed remained with them all, guiding their path through difficulties and joys alike. "Thank you," he whispered to Naomi as the others began gathering their things to return to the cabin. "For what?" she asked, her face turned up to his, still beautiful to him after all these years. "For trusting me that night," he said simply. "For building this life with me, for everything." Naomi's smile held all the warmth of their shared years together. "As you once told Clara, we're all part of the stars, connected to their light. I think perhaps they brought us together, knowing what we could become." "Perhaps they did," Xavier agreed, helping her to her feet. Hand in hand, they followed their family down the hill toward the lights of the cabin below, their own personal constellation of love and belonging guiding them home. The years continued their steady march forward. Hill City grew into a proper town with paved streets, electric lights, and eventually even automobiles that sent horses skittering to the sides of roads. The Fitzgerald family remained a cornerstone of the community, their story of beginnings beneath the Wyoming stars becoming something of a local legend. In 1910, Clara published her first major astronomical paper, identifying patterns in variable stars that had eluded other researchers. Though published under a male colleague's name with Clara listed as assistant, those who understood the work recognized it was primarily hers. She sent copies to her parents, her pride evident in the careful inscription, "To the two people who taught me to always look toward the light." Thomas expanded his business to include automobile repair, adapting to the changing times with characteristic pragmatism. His children grew, James following his father into mechanical work, while Rebecca showed her grandmother's gift for teaching. Alina, the youngest Fitzgerald, surprised everyone by announcing her engagement to a professor of mathematics she had met while visiting Clara in Boston. Their wedding in 1912 was a joyous family affair, though bittersweet as it meant Alina would move east, leaving Xavier and Naomi truly alone for the first time in their marriage. "The house seems so quiet," Naomi remarked that autumn, after all 3 children had returned to their respective homes and lives. "Peaceful," Xavier suggested, though he too felt the absence of their children's energy and presence. "Lonely," Naomi countered with a small smile. "Though I suppose we should enjoy having each other to ourselves after all these years." They did find new rhythms in this chapter of their lives. Xavier, now in his late 60s, devoted himself to writing down the history of Hill City and the surrounding area. preserving the stories of the frontier days that were rapidly fading as modernization spread westward. Naomi volunteered at the library and occasionally substituted at the school, keeping her connection to education alive. They traveled when possible, visiting Alina and her husband in Boston, where Clara also lived, and taking trips to see the national parks being established throughout the West. Their life together had a gentler pace than the early years of childrearing and career building, but no less joy or purpose. In 1915, as war raged in Europe, Xavier suffered a mild heart attack while chopping wood behind their cabin. The doctor ordered rest and a reduction in physical activity, warnings that the formerly robust sheriff found difficult to accept. "I'm not an invalid," he protested, as Naomi insisted he let Thomas handle the heavier chores around the property. "No, you're not," she agreed, her tone brooking no argument. "And I intend to keep it that way by ensuring you don't overtax yourself." He acquiesced with grudging grace, recognizing in his wife's concern the same love that had sustained them through nearly 40 years together. Though physically stronger than many men his age, Xavier was forced to acknowledge that at 70, he could no longer take his health for granted. The war years brought challenges and changes. Though America's direct involvement was brief, the conflict's ripples were felt even in Wyoming. Thomas's son James enlisted and was sent to France, returning in 1919 with a French bride and lingering nightmares from the trenches that only slowly faded. Through it all, Xavier and Naomi remained the steady center of their family, offering support, wisdom, and the perspective that comes from having weathered many storms together. Their love, which had begun so unexpectedly on the open prairie, had deepened into something as vast and enduring as the Wyoming sky itself. In 1923, they celebrated their 45th wedding anniversary with a gathering that brought all 3 children, 5 grandchildren, and the first great-grandchild James's infant son back to Hill City. Clara, now 50, took a sabbatical from her research to spend the entire summer with her parents, bringing her telescope to set up behind the cabin. On a clear July night, almost exactly 45 years after Clara's birth, the family gathered on the hillside that had witnessed so many significant moments in their history. Xavier, now 78 but still straight-backed and clear-eyed, sat with Naomi on a blanket while their descendants arranged themselves around them. "Tell us the story again, grandfather," requested Rebecca's daughter Mary, a serious 10-year-old with Xavier's dark eyes. "Which story is that?" he asked, though he knew precisely which tale she meant. "About how great Aunt Clara was born beneath the stars, and how you found grandmother," Mary clarified. "It's my favorite." Xavier exchanged a smile with Naomi, whose hand rested comfortably in his as it had countless times over their decades together. Though her auburn hair had long since turned silver and lines mapped her face, she was still the most beautiful woman he had ever seen. "Well," he began, his voice carrying clearly in the night air, "it was a summer evening much like this one, back in 1878. I was riding patrol north of Hill City when I heard what sounded like a gunshot." As he recounted the familiar tale how he'd found a young woman alone and in labor, how they'd delivered Clara beneath the canopy of stars, how he'd made the promise about always knowing light, Xavier watched the faces of his family illuminated by the campfire Thomas had built. Each one, from Clara herself to the newest great-grandchild sleeping in his mother's arms, was part of the legacy that began that night. When he finished the story, Clara took up her part of the family tradition, guiding the younger children through the constellations visible overhead. Her expertise had grown with years of professional study, but she still described the heavens with the wonder and reverence she'd felt since childhood. "The stars remind us that even in darkness, there is light," she told her rapt audience. "That no matter how small we may feel, we're part of something vast and beautiful." Later, as the family made their way back to the cabin, Xavier and Naomi lingered behind, walking slowly arm in arm beneath the star-strewn sky. "I never tire of hearing you tell that story," Naomi said, leaning into his side for warmth as the night air cooled. "Though I'm not sure how much is memory and how much has become embellished over the years." Xavier chuckled. "The core of it remains true. I found you, Clara was born beneath these same stars, and I knew even then that both of you would always carry light." "You brought the light, Xavier," Naomi said softly, "into both our lives." He stopped their progress, turning to face her in the starlight. Though age had changed them both, in that moment he saw clearly the young woman she had been, frightened but courageous, vulnerable but strong. And he knew she saw in him the earnest young deputy who had delivered her child and promised protection. "We found it together," he corrected gently, bending to brush his lips against hers, "and passed it on to our children and they to theirs." Naomi smiled against his mouth, like the stars themselves, giving their light from generation to generation. "Exactly like that," Xavier agreed, offering his arm once more as they continued toward the warm glow of the cabin windows, where their family awaited. In the autumn of 1928, as the leaves turned gold in the hills around Hill City, Xavier Fitzgerald passed peacefully in his sleep at the age of 83. Naomi found him at dawn, his expression serene, one hand outstretched toward her side of the bed as if reaching for her even in his final moments. The funeral was attended by nearly everyone in Hill City and many from surrounding communities. As sheriff, businessman, historian, father, and friend, Xavier had touched countless lives during his 50 years in Wyoming. Clara, Thomas, and Alina stood beside their mother as friends and neighbors shared stories of Xavier's kindness, his fairness, his quiet strength that had helped shape the community. In accordance with his wishes, Xavier was buried on the hillside near where Clara had been born. The headstone, carved from local granite, bore the inscription, "He brought light to all who knew him." In the days and weeks that followed, Naomi found both grief and comfort in the family that surrounded her. Though offered homes with any of her children, she chose to remain in Hill City, in the house she had shared with Xavier for so many years. "This is where our life together happened," she explained to Clara, who had extended her visit to help her mother adjust to widowhood. "I can feel him here in every room, every view from every window." Clara understood. At 55, she had built a distinguished career but never married, finding fulfillment in her work and in her role as beloved aunt and great-aunt to the expanding Fitzgerald clan. She recognized in her mother's decision the same independence she had always admired and emulated. That winter, Naomi began the process of organizing Xavier's papers and journals, discovering anew the man she had loved for half a century. His accounts of their early days together, his pride in each child's accomplishments, his reflections on the changing world around them all revealed the depth of his thoughts and feelings, often expressed more freely in writing than he had in person. "Listen to this," she told Clara one evening, reading from a journal dated 1879, just before their marriage. "I never believed in fate until I found Naomi and Clara beneath those stars. Now I understand that some souls are meant to find each other, meant to create light together in this often dark world." Clara smiled through the tears that sprang to her eyes. He always did have a way with words when he chose to use them. "Yes," Naomi agreed, tracing the handwritten lines with gentle fingers. Your father contained multitudes that few people ever fully saw. You saw, Clara said simply. You knew all of him. Naomi nodded, closing the journal carefully. As he knew me. It's a rare gift, to be so completely seen and loved by another person. The following summer, a package arrived for Naomi from the Harvard Observatory. Inside was a star chart unlike any she had seen before, with a note in Clara's handwriting. The International Astronomical Union has approved naming a newly catalogued star in the constellation Cygnus. Its official designation is XF 1878, but it will be known in our publications as Fitzgerald's Light. Look for it in the northern sky, Mother. Father's light now truly shines among the stars. That night, with Thomas's help, Naomi climbed the hill to Xavier's grave. Using Clara's detailed chart and Thomas's steady hands on the telescope, she located the distant point of light that now bore their family name. It was a small star, not visible to the naked eye, but bright and unwavering through the lens. "Oh, Xavier," she whispered into the night breeze. "How fitting that you should end up among the stars that witnessed our beginning." Naomi lived 4 more years, remaining active and engaged with her family and community until the end. She died peacefully in the spring of 1932, having seen her grandchildren grow to adulthood and several great-grandchildren born. She was buried beside Xavier on the hillside, her headstone a matching piece of granite inscribed. She carried light to all who needed it. The legend of the baby born beneath the stars, and the couple whose love began that night continued to be told in Hill City for generations. As the town grew and changed, as automobiles replaced horses and electricity replaced oil lamps, the story remained a touchstone, a reminder of the town's frontier beginnings, and the enduring power of love found in unexpected circumstances. Clara continued her astronomical work until her retirement in 1940 at age 67, earning belated recognition for her contributions to the field. She never married, but counted her life rich in family, purpose, and the ongoing exploration of the heavens that had witnessed her birth. Thomas maintained the family's presence in Hill City, his repair shop evolving into a successful automobile dealership that his son James eventually took over. He lived to see the post-war boom transform Wyoming, maintaining throughout his life the practical approach and steady character he had inherited from his father. Eleanor and her husband returned to Hill City after his retirement from academic life, building a home near Thomas's family. Her children and grandchildren inherited both the Fitzgerald affinity for education and the family's tradition of stargazing, keeping alive the connection to the night sky that had figured so prominently in their history. As the years stretched into decades, the direct memories of Xavier and Naomi Fitzgerald faded, but their legacy continued through their descendants and the stories they passed down. Each generation added its own chapters while honoring the extraordinary beginning, a baby born beneath the stars, a cowboy's promise of light, and a love that illuminated countless lives through the years. And on clear Wyoming nights, the Fitzgerald descendants still gathered on the hillside, pointing out to their children the special star that bore their name, teaching them that even in the darkest times, light endures in the sky above, in the connections between loved ones, and in the stories that bind past to present to future in an unbroken chain of belonging and hope.